Hey, everybody, it's your friend James Shaw. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm excited that you are. We're bringing in one of our best friends of our community. Julia, I'm so glad you're here. It's Fair Housing Month, which is what we're going to talk about today. And we got to talk about it. It's important conversations to learn about why, just some opportunities we have, maybe even some mistakes we're making, and just what's going on with that. So I'm glad you're here. But will you introduce yourself to everybody? Tell them who you are, where you are, and a little bit about you.
I sure will, and I'd love to. And first and foremost, thank you, James, for having me. Always an honor to be on Pivot Shift Ahead. I am Julia Lashay. I am the head of inclusion and belonging at the wonderful KWRI, Keller Williams Realty International. And my job is to make our offices more inclusive. We got a whole lot of kinds of people out there in the world, and we want to have people do business with us, and we want to serve all of the consumers that exist out there in the world. And today, of course, like you mentioned, we're talking about fair housing because April is indeed Fair Housing Month. So thank you for having me. A joy to be on with you as always.
We love having you. And let's see, this past, 1968, it's 56, did I do my math right? 57, 58 years, whatever it is.
56 years of fair housing.
Years, yeah.
Yep.
Right. Okay, and so let's walk through it, because I think sometimes we look at it and go, well, it's 2024. Like, why do we need to talk about this?
Why are we talking about 1968? Right.
Exactly, right. It's not 1968. Yeah. Can we walk through why, first of all, why this exists, but then you have some surprising data to share with us about experiences people are still having in their home search and stuff like that. Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. So fair housing exists, of course, to protect people in protected classes from discrimination in the rental and the sale of housing. It was passed in 1968. It had been up for Congress to approve for several years, but when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, they decided it would be fitting prior to his funeral to actually pass the act he had been working on for several years prior. So fair housing was passed April 11th, 1968. Now, the interesting thing that people don't know about that is it was passed in 1968, but no one ever enforced it for 20 years. Fair housing has only been enforced since 1988 when HUD began enforcing fair housing. Fast forward even to now, 2024, we had a law that was passed that nobody enforced for 20 years. And now, 56 years later, very few people actually report discrimination or fair housing, not because it doesn't exist, mainly because people don't know how, don't know why, and a lot of times we're doing it and we don't even know that we're doing it. The statistic that you mentioned, James, was that last year NAR surveyed buyers and found that 50% of buyers, Asian buyers, Hispanic buyers, Black home buyers, said they had been steered. As we all know, steering is a violation of fair housing. So that's just one example of things that continue to go on. Excuse me, all the bold graduates, and the thing is, and I think that I'm going to make a pretty outlandish statement. I honestly think we all steer all the time, and I don't think it's because we're bad people.
Right.
I think it's because we think we're helping our clients, and unbeknownst to us, we're not. And I have myself personally a half dozen stories of when I thought I was helping my client, and I'm using air quotes if you're just listening, but sure. I think that I was helping my client, and really what I was doing was steering, and also it would have been harmful if they would have actually listened to me. Luckily they didn't, right?
Yeah. Well, let's unpack it, because when you shared that number with me, I was pretty surprised that in 2024 you'd have half of buyers of color say that they felt they had been steered. And again, my thought was, I'm assuming, and it's an assumption because I believe in our industry and I just believe in good people, that almost always that has to be not on purpose, that just has to be an oversight or us speaking before we think or something. And so can you walk us through just the reminders and some opportunities for us to pause for a minute and realize maybe we aren't helping, but we could be breaking the law?
Correct. And you know what? And you're right. I first and foremost, I love being a realtor. I love realtors. I think that by and at large, we are highly professional. We are highly ethical, and we do things the right way. In every industry, there are some bad actors, right? There are some people who are actually out there conducting malpractice, if you will. But most of the people aren't doing it on purpose at all. And then a lot of times they don't even realize they're doing it. And I think the first thing just starts with really examining ourselves. we do all have biases, right? It's a thing that exists with the human nature of people. We do, and sometimes they come out when you don't expect them to, and you don't even know that they're doing them. You're doing them. For example, there was a lady in a class I taught this week, and she said, she was very openly expressing that she disagreed with a certain demographic of people. She didn't like that group of people. She felt strongly about it. She felt strongly about her kids having to be, in the same space with those type of people. And then she said, but don't worry, it doesn't come out in my business. The consumer would never know. And the whole class kind of chuckled because I think we beg to differ. We do all have certain thoughts or biases or prejudices, and maybe you don't. Maybe you're a perfect realtor, but most people have some sort of feelings even about the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. People have feels about it. It is a polarizing topic in a lot of places. So I think the first place we start is just by examining how we feel about other people, about people who may be different than us, and examining some biases that we might have, whether they be conscious or unconscious, and really establishing, when I look in the mirror, who am I really? Do I like the professional I am? Do I have thoughts about people that I'm pretending don't come out when I'm serving them? So the first thing is just really self-examination of really, where are you as a person with people's differences, with the concept of diversity? We're serving a very large consumer base. There are millions of people out there, and they're all different. They're all different races, different colors, different religions, different sexual orientations, different genders, different fill in the blank. So the first thing is just examining where you are, because sometimes you don't mean to be treating people differently, and you could be doing it unconsciously. And so the second thing I will say about that is that the way to protect yourself from yourself is to actually be consistent in your practices and your policies. Here's what I mean by that. I have a buyer consultation. I've had the same buyer consultation for 20 years. I do the same thing. My whole team knows that I can do it inside and outside. I can do it jumping on one leg, patting my head, and rubbing my belly. And the reason I do it that way is because, one, I make sure that I am including everything I want to include, but really it's because I know that I'm flawed. I'm not a perfect person. And I want to make sure that I'm giving everybody the same service. So no matter what I think about the person sitting in front of me, or what I don't even know that I think about the person sitting in front of me, I know for sure they've gotten the same service because I do the same thing every time.
Yeah. Right.
So I think implementing consistent practices and policies in that, your buyer consultations, your listing presentations, how you show houses, what you say when people walk in your open house, if you do the same thing every time, it protects you from you. And
Yes.
and James, it also keeps us out of fair housing jail, because God forbid we ever be brought before professional standards. One of the first things they ask is, show us how you normally consistently do it. And if you can't demonstrate that, even if you're consistently doing it wrong, they'll just send you to class, right? They'll send you to training. But if you did do it different for one person than you did it for another person, well, maybe you did accidentally or intentionally discriminate. And so consistency not only protects you from yourself, but it keeps us out of fair housing jail, which, by the way, is a $20,000 bond, James. Nobody's broker wants to come and get you out for $20,000 for an accident you might have made.
They won't. They won't get you for that. I mean, the thing that I think about, easy spots where something might come up, sometimes you ask for a pre-approval and sometimes you don't.
Right.
And, if we got to be careful. There was an agent one time, I remember they said, I'm uncomfortable on this buyer. I kind of got this weird feeling. So I'm going to ask them for a copy of their driver's license to put in the file just as another layer. And I said, if you're going to do that for all of them.
Correct. That's exactly right.
If your grandma comes and buys a house from you and you say, Grandma, I need a copy of your driver's license for my file. Like those types of things that the way you proceed through the transaction and the relationship, really the way to stay out of trouble is to treat everybody the same. And like you said, 100%. If you're doing something wrong, they'll educate you. But if I'm picking and choosing about who I'm doing what with, that's a totally different story. But that's an example of a time that we may make an adjustment in our service, not because we intend to violate fair housing. We're just thinking, something seems amiss here. We've got to pay attention to those feelings and make sure that we're not treating one person differently than another.
And even going back to biases, something may feel amiss based on your previous experiences,
Oh,
what
yeah.
you think about people. I mean, I do a little class called Unconscious Bias, and we have some pictures for people to choose from. And some people say, well, I'd be a little cautious about this person. But other people might say, well, I'm so glad he showed up. I was scared until he got there. Like, so it depends on even what your version of safe might look like, or what a suspicious person is to you. But definitely, that's one thing that we can do to make sure we're advocating for fair housing and that we're actually demonstrating fair housing.
Yeah.
Another
And you
thing we
talked
could do.
about, oh, I'm sorry,
Go ahead,
Julia.
Jim.
Can I ask one question real quick, though, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
Because you talked about steering, and you mentioned that 50% of people of color have said they felt steered.
Yeah.
It's easy sometimes to think that fair housing applies only to that, but and just as a reminder, there are multiple protected groups inside of fair housing law. It's not just race and color.
Correct. In fact, disability is the number one fair housing violation.
I'm sure it is. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And the reason also,
Can you remind us what they all are so that we can just make sure that we are paying attention?
For sure. There's race, there's color, there's religion, there's sexual sex, which now includes sexual orientation and gender, right? There's I'm on 5. I'm counting on my fingers here to make sure. Familial status. And then what am I forgetting? I've got 2 more.
Disability and national origin.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. But the disability is the number one fair housing violation. Again, not because we're bad people. Most of us actually think that we're prepared to serve people and don't. Also, we don't know when people have disabilities. We have this image of our head of people in a wheelchair, being disabled, but there are a lot of other disabilities we can't see. In fact, James, 1 in 4 adults in the United States have a documented disability. 1 in 4. 25% of your database has a documented disability that you probably don't know anything about. And we're not making the reasonable accommodations and the reasonable modifications that we should be, mainly because sometimes we simply don't know. And so one thing we could do is, in your listing presentations and your buyer consultations, we could ask in such a way that's not offensive. My friend Stephen Gindel, he runs our KW Special Abilities community. He always reminds us that we could ask people, who in your household will have the most difficulty with this move? Or who in your household will have the most difficulty with this transaction? It gives the client an opportunity to share that, well, my child has fill in the blank. Or, it might be me because I have fill in the blank. Or one time I had a client that couldn't read. And I didn't know he couldn't read until we were halfway through the transaction. And he says, you keep getting frustrated with me about this, but I can't read. He had already signed all these contracts before I found out he didn't read any of them. And so I wasn't serving him to the highest capacity. I wasn't being the best fiduciary because I didn't know, because I didn't ask the right questions. If I would have asked him that question, maybe he would have shared with me that he can't read and someone else needs to be there to assist him with the documents that I'm sending him. But things like that, we could certainly incorporate into our everyday practices to make sure that we are actually providing fair housing to everybody that we encounter.
Yeah, it's interesting because, first of all, I wouldn't even think to ask. I would never ask a buyer or a seller, can you read? But to ask, hey, who may have the toughest time during the transaction? Or are there any challenges that you know right now? Or maybe challenges is the right word. You help me figure out the right word. But is there anything that we should be prepared for as we move down this path that might need to be something we talk about? I don't know. Yeah. What's the right kind of question to ask?
I think I would actually just say who, and it might be them, who in this transaction might have the most difficulty. Who might need the most support in this transaction that we're having here, and allow them the space to just answer that question for you. And then you'll know, because 25% of your database has a documented disability. We don't know if we don't ask. And a lot of times they're not going to share that information because they're not sure that they're safe with you, or they're uncomfortable, or don't even know how to bring it up,
Yeah, it's really interesting. Can you give us some examples of times that we might say something inadvertently that though would be considered a violation under fair housing? Especially, I think steering, you said, is probably the top one.
Yeah, so and I don't know if you heard when I was saying who in your household, because I stay away from who in your family, right? Because I don't want to start asking familial questions. So that's why I said who in your household, not who in your family, because I don't want to get into that lane. There's certain things like, are you buying with a husband and a wife, or is your husband going to be joining us, or your wife going to? We don't know these people's household composition. And by the way, the nuclear family that we might be thinking looks like a typical family in our head is actually not the most common family structure right now. In fact, as far as home buyers, single women are the number one people buying homes right now. So being mindful that we're asking information about familial status, certainly being mindful about even words. Inclusive language is a big deal. The words that we use matter. In a lot of associations, they've banned certain words because of the historical context. For example, a lot of people have banned master bedroom because of the historical context. Instead, we would say a primary bedroom. Or people are still using the term Jack and Jill. Maybe we don't use that term, or his and hers. Maybe we say dual. Certain words that we are just using because words matter. And you might be even losing business by the words you're using and not even realizing it. You might be using words like his or her and Jack and Jill and not even recognizing that clients are passing you up because you're not appealing to the larger audience. Without even knowing. And so being mindful of our words, being inclusive in our language. I do want to make one comment about steering because it's the number one. I'll just share a story if I could, James, about myself, of course, because I know you all are perfect real estate agents. I'll just talk about me, if that's okay.
Please do.
So example, because I think we do these things a lot. I had a client and I wanted to help her. She had 2 young boys, same age distance as part as my boys, and so I had an affinity with her, and I really wanted to help her. And she wanted to move out of her neighborhood because of drugs and crime and buy a home in a safer neighborhood. And I was excited to be able to help her with that. She found a house in a neighborhood that I didn't like, because let's be honest, as realtors, we do have biases about neighborhoods. There's some neighborhoods we prefer to sell in, and neighborhoods we'd rather not. And in this instance, I would rather not. And she found the house there, and I wanted her to live somewhere else because I think people like her don't live over there with people like them. That's what I was thinking in my head at the time. And she bought a house. She wanted to buy the house smack dab in the middle of said neighborhood. And I wanted to steer her somewhere else. But she bought that house and called me about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And she said, I'm calling you because it's the 5-year anniversary of when I bought my house. And I wanted to thank you for your role in that, because you probably didn't know that I was going through a divorce and I was very unstable. And this house provided a lot of stability for my kids. And her oldest son had just graduated from high school. And he used to go down to the community center at the end of the block, which I also didn't think that he should be going down to because it's an unsafe neighborhood. Your kids shouldn't be going down there with those kids. It's a bad neighborhood. And I didn't think he should be going down there. And he went at the end of the block to a community program. And because he had been doing that, he was going to a robotics after school program there. He was going off to college on a full ride engineering scholarship. So she was sharing that with me. And then she says, and Julia, I finished my basement. Remember how it looked? I want you to come over and see it. It's this and this. And I said, well, that's wonderful. Do you know how much equity you have in the home? And she said, no, how do I find that out? So I ran a CMA for her. And friends, she had almost $100,000 in equity in a home that I didn't want her to buy, in a neighborhood I didn't want her to live in. Her son was going to school because they did. And I wasn't trying to steer her because I was a bad person. I was trying to help her with my air quotes. But a lot of times we overstep, right? And we think we know what's best for our clients when really we don't. And we should only be allowing them to express what's best for them and them to figure out what's a good school and for them to figure out what's a good neighborhood. And if I would have steered her away from that neighborhood like I thought I should, she would have missed out on $100,000 in equity. Also, by the way, she was a first-time home buyer. She had used down payment assistance, and it fell off after 5 years. It was a 5-year grant. So she had, it was a first generation buyer. Let me say that. No one in her entire lineage had ever bought a home. And so we do these things to help people, but friends, it's called steering, and it's not helping. So those are just some ways that we accidentally violate fair housing, and it hurts our clients and not helps them.
Well, and it sticks with, I don't think most people are doing it on purpose. Look, there are people that do. There are people that are just not great people who have their real estate license and are proud of their bias. And then there are it's accidental. I believe in people that it's probably accidental. Okay, you brought something up and I just want to talk about it. And it might be controversial, but this whole idea, and you said it, of diversity, equity, inclusion is a hot button
Yep.
I don't get it, just to be transparent. I don't understand why we get so excitable about it, but I know some people do. And that's where I hear people say all the time, I've always called it a master bedroom. I'm calling it a master bedroom. I think it's stupid that the board says and the MLS says I can't call it a master bedroom anymore. This is so dumb, without understanding the context of where that term comes from. Well, we don't, that's not how we operate now. This is not how, so why do we have, all those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why are the words rather so important? Like, if we were just going to say, hey, before we get all wound up about the term master bedroom or main bedroom or primary bedroom or owner's suite, before we get all wound up about it, let's understand why it's probably a good time to make that change.
Yeah, I love that you asked that question, because you're right. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is just really polarizing right now in a lot of spaces and communities. In fact, I was actually speaking at a university on Monday, and I realized in that moment, I said, I wouldn't be doing this in Texas. In fact, they wouldn't allow me to stand here and talk about DEI on your platform here at a university in Texas. And it's used for me, I believe, as political propaganda, because I think people really misunderstand what it really is. And so briefly, I'll just explain to you what we believe here at Keller Williams diversity, equity, and inclusion is. And the D is just diversity. Everybody's different. Every single client you've ever had is different than the client before. People say, "Oh, I'm against diversity." Well, you can't be, because your business is already wildly diverse. Now, it may not be racially diverse, but there are so many different kinds of people and so many different. Nobody in your database is the same. So you are, in fact, currently running and operating a wildly diverse business, even without understanding that you're doing that, because every single one of your clients are different. We've got 170,000 agents in 58 countries. All of them are different, very different. By default, that is the definition of diversity. We are just simply unique individuals, all of us. The E part is just about equity, realizing and recognizing that we are all different people. We're literally all different people. We're all individuals with our uniqueness and however we may differ, but we want people to have access to the same opportunities. In our world, friends, that's called homeownership. Someone in your licensing entity in your state has provided you with a real estate license to sell homes and provide the wonderful opportunity of homeownership to anyone who so desires it. We want people to get into homes. In fact, it's the best industry in the world. If you ask me, we make the biggest impact by helping people build wealth through the acquisition of real property. And we want everybody to be able to do it, all those different people. So they may need different tools and resources and education to reach that same outcome. That is literally the definition of equity, removing barriers so people can reach the same outcome. For my client, that was down payment assistance. That's a form of equity. She needed it, but I have a lot of clients that don't. But that's equity for her to have the same outcome. The I part is simple. We just want all those different people to have access to the same opportunities here at Keller Williams. I'm sure in your office, in your market center, in your brokerage, you want all those agents to have access to the same opportunities at your brokerage. And I'm sure in your real estate business, you want access to as many people as possible. They will all be different, to have access to home ownership, and they might need different things to do it, but you want to make sure that they do it with you. That is literally the definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. I'm not entirely sure either, James, why it's so polarizing.
Yeah. Well, and again, we just want opportunities for everyone. We have to recognize that we've had different people, different thoughts in our database. And yet, if we just care about the community and we want to help people, then we'll succeed. You do a lot to help educate us. I love everything that you do. Do you want to tell some people about what you've got coming up, what you teach, and how they can connect with you, Julia?
Sure, absolutely. You can always go to the DEI community. You can find it on communities.kw.com. Go to diversity, equity, and inclusion. There, you'll find all of the classes that we offer. We offer the Color of Real Estate, which really just talks about our role in real estate. This beautiful opportunity we have to offer homeownership to the world. What's our role in that? So that's the Color of Real Estate class. We have unconscious bias in real estate, which is my favorite class, actually, because we have a little fun. I use me as an example, not you. You're perfect real estate agents, I know. And then we also have inclusive leadership. And that's for anyone. We're all leaders. We're all running a real estate business. Whether you're on the ALC, whether you're the broker at your office, whether you are just running little people in your home, you are a leader. And we want to talk about how do you make spaces where people feel welcome, seen, heard, and valued. That's actually how you run a really successful business. So that's what DEI is. And we invite you to join that community, and we invite you to take part in any of those classes because, James, I do believe that we are in the best industry in the world.
Yeah.
I think we have the best opportunity to help people build wealth for the acquisition of real estate. And this month, we're just going to keep talking about how we can do that for more people.
No doubt. Julia, thank you for joining us. We always love having you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, James. Take care, everyone. I appreciate it.